Hey folks, this is Drew Burdick with the Building Great Experiences podcast. With me, I have Joe Bell, a friend that I've known since probably 2010 or 11. It's been a while. We were both involved in the music industry pretty heavily. For those of you who don't know me, I had a clothing brand that was focused on electronic music. Joe and I connected. We've stayed in touch. And we recently just reconnected and had found out that we have a mutual love for customer experience. So super excited to have him on the show. Thanks for being on, Joe.
Yeah, my pleasure, Drew.
So why don't you give people a little bit of background, who you are, what you've done, and maybe some of the things that you've been doing most recently.
So I am a social scientist by training that turned marketer about 15 years ago. I have built a number of venture-backed MarTech companies. I've served as a marketing consultant now for about a decade. I help large organizations really optimize their marketing functions, and I work with a number of startups, generally as a first marketing hire to build out the marketing function. I recently served as the CMO of CX Pilots, a consultancy, the premier CX consultancy for professional services firms, and I'm currently a partner at the go-to-market agency.
Cool. Yeah, great stuff. Maybe layer in, I'd love to share a little bit about your background and experience in the music industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I left academia originally, I was working on using social media for research, recruitment, and community engagement for some National Institutes of Health studies. And so we would go into communities and we would enroll women who were likely to become pregnant. And then we would follow them through their pregnancy until their children were 20. And so these were very long-term studies. And at the time, social media was kind of just becoming a part of our everyday lives. And being researchers, we're very keen to leverage any innovations that exist in order to engage the communities that we were researching. And I had developed some best practices for Facebook. This was in the late 2000s. And just as a hobby, started applying it to local music venues in the area, and it worked really, really well. And so I left working in academia and did a brief stint working in entertainment, doing marketing strategy, data and analytics for a number of entertainment companies, some that were producing concerts, and I worked with a number of record labels. It was in that space that you and I first met. And so I'm very passionate about music. It's my most preferred form of art. But it's funny, the things that you learn in music are applicable in B2B tech or really any space. But it's definitely a lot more fun than, 6 a.m. stand-ups.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, great. So thanks for giving that introduction. Today, we're talking, as I said, about the intersection of marketing and customer experience. You obviously worked in both of those worlds and have had a lot of opportunity to kind of see, what marketing strategies make sense in customer experience and vice versa. So let's talk about like that intersection of those two things. Where do you see it? Why should we talk about it? Why does it matter? And maybe what's the impact of investing in it?
Absolutely. So I think definition would help us a little bit here. So when we're talking about CX, what we're really talking about is the science of customers. CX is a business function that takes into account every interaction that a customer or a potential customer has with a business. And what it does is it measures their subjective experience with that business. It takes those data in, analyzes them, and then designs changes to the organization to prioritize that experience. And through change management, it orients the entire business around the customer. And when businesses do this, what they find is that their churn or their attrition decreases. The likelihood that a sales prospect becomes a customer increases exponentially. And there's a number of studies out there that show in Fortune 500 businesses, for example, about 10 to 15% of market capitalization is directly attributable to CX or customer experience. And when we're talking about marketing, what we're really talking about is the process of matching a need with a product or service. And there have been some shifts historically, particularly that have happened over about the last 15, 20 years that have made that definition of marketing really shift from historically what it was. when you think of marketing in a historical sense, it's really just amplification. We have a message, we have a product, and we broadcast it out to the world. We inundate people with some message, and eventually there'll be uptake, and eventually customers will trickle in as a result of that application. Technology has played a very central role in the marketing shift that's happened in the last 20 years. And the main reason for that is when a company is telling a consumer, let's say in 1960, that, we're the best soap. You keep inundating them with that message, and eventually they might start thinking we're the best soap. But with the advent of things like social media and instant communication, now you have people that are trying that soap and they're talking about their experience with them. They're saying, this soap isn't that great. I really prefer this other soap. There's Google reviews. There are product reviews on sites like Amazon. And so what that's done is it has deprioritized the messaging of an organization, and it has made the consumer the empowered entity in that business relationship. And so with that, you can't really just say that your product or your service is something. People actually have to experience it and agree with what you say. And so that shift has turned marketing less into something that just amplifies a message and more into that matching process where marketing efficacy, good marketing, there's a one-to-one relationship in someone that enters a funnel and what comes out on. And so for every person that comes in, if they become a customer, that's nirvana state marketing. And you can't do that if your marketing messaging, your marketing strategy, and your tactics are manipulating consumers or other businesses, etc. And so those two things, the idea of science customers, understanding customers, orienting their experience, or orienting the business around their experience, marketing that really is just matching customer needs with a product or service. They learn from each other. And there are a number of disciplines and practices within each that they borrow from. And so there are two very distinct disciplines, but there is a lot of overlap between the two.
Man, so much good. You said so many good things. I'm going to try to hit on a few pieces that you mentioned. So one is, I think that this idea of like marketers are historically trained to amplify messages, right? Like, get the word out, get as many eyeballs on stuff, get the attention. And I think in some ways, even with the social media age, people have continued to operate with that philosophy, right? Like there's a lot of MBA programs and marketing programs that still kind of preach this, hey, you just try to, optimize the funnel and just drive volume in the top and then convert it down here. And you have these very, sort of rudimentary conversion metrics that you're tracking that you say, all right, X% here and X% there and X% there, and it equals money, right? And like, that's fine. But to your point, I think that marketing, consumer expectations have changed so that they expect things to be a great experience. They expect that when you tell them your product is going to be great and it's not great, and you told them that, they're going to go yell about it, and they're going to post it on Reddit, and they're going to post it on LinkedIn, and they're going to post it on Instagram, they're posting it on everywhere. And so marketers no longer can they just sort of say, like, my job is just to amplify. I'm not I'm not responsible for the quality of the product or the service that we're offering, right? I think marketers have to take a look and say, like, is the messaging that we're using over here, the campaigns that we're creating and the things that we're communicating, does that align and match up with what we're actually delivering? And if it doesn't, how do you start to like challenge the organization to say, hold on, if we're saying this over here and we're driving people into the funnel, we have to actually like deliver on that promise, because otherwise we're going to completely erode trust and loyalty. And over time, we're going to lose business. And it doesn't matter how many dollars you throw at marketing. Now the word on the street is your product sucks, right? They're going to be like, I'm not buying from that customer or that company anymore. I know that I'm going to get a bad product. And I think, the days where businesses could kind of like, I don't know, hide under some of the like just mass marketing, get the word out, people buy, and like you accounted for, all right, if we sell X amount of, products and 50% of that is crap, but like most of the people aren't going to return the product. So we're still going to, I think like those days are gone. I think people are much more like expect, no, give me my money back. Like I don't, you told me that it was going to solve all my problems and it doesn't. I don't, if you either give my money back and then some, or I'm going to go yell about it and get on my feet and get mad. So I think that the intersection is really important. And I think a lot of times I see, like you said, there's two distinct disciplines, CX and marketing, but a lot of situations is sort of like throw it over the wall, right? Like we did our part, we're amplifying the message. You all got to figure out how to deliver on the promise that we made. But I think there's this whole, like, I've heard it phrases like promise maker, promise keeper, right? And if you're the marketing leaders and you're making a promise to your customer that something's going to happen, like you should probably make sure that it happens, right? Or change your messaging and don't promise something that you can't deliver. So anyway, that's one thing that comes to mind as you were talking. The other thing that comes to mind is you hit on a few really important things around measurement. And I think that's where a lot of people wrestle, right? Is like, how do you measure the impact of investing in customer experience? Like, I think everyone sort of acknowledges like customer experience is important, but they don't know how to like actually measure the impact of it. Like there's a lot of those traditional marketing metrics that people look at, and then those metrics may not be super connected to the CX metrics. And so there's a bit of a like disconnect. I don't know if you're seeing that. And like, I'd love your thoughts on the measurement aspect of this, because I think it's important, especially as people who may not be currently investing in, a better customer experience are trying to wrap their head around like, well, how do I even know like if this is a good investment, like it's actually getting ROI?
Yeah. So with measurement, one thing that's really, really important is that measurement doesn't matter in other organizations. And so, there's a traditional strategy within CX for customer understanding and measurement, and those largely fall on voice of customer or program. And when you're measuring, you have to tie those metrics or correlate them to other things. And one of the biggest barriers to truly measuring, understanding, and then impacting the organization is cutting down those silos. Another big discipline within customer understanding is journey mapping. And, I've seen this at a number of very large organizations, but to truly do journey mapping, you need to bring together different departments that interact with a customer and go through the entire life cycle or the entire journey of someone, just existing to having a need, to searching for some vendor to satisfy that need, interacting with the company through their marketing, their salespeople, through their onboarding, customer success, and continued use. And what happens in those situations when you have all of these different departments sitting together in journey mapping sessions, every single journey mapping session, you hear someone say, I thought somebody else was doing that. Or, oh, I thought this department was handling that. And it's that idea of bringing everyone together, of cutting down those silos so that all of the departments can unite around a customer, that you really start to generate that understanding of the customer. And when you have that understanding, it's really easy to say, okay, if this is what we're trying to accomplish, here's how we're going to measure it. And as we're measuring it, being able to have purview on the multiple aspects of the business that it actually impacts requires sign-in from up above. If you have the CFO of a very large organization on board with tying revenue metrics to CX metrics, chances are that organization is going to be able to really leverage experience and be able to prove out the impact that it has on their business. And there are every single study where you look at experience and tie them to business impact or some type of revenue metric, there is a perfect correlation between improving your experience and improving profits.
Yeah. I think you said something that triggered a thought for me, which is oftentimes, I think CX metrics are viewed as like secondary metrics, right? They're sort of like, there's the primary metrics of an organization, which is like sales and revenue usually. If you're a healthy business. And then there's sort of these secondary metrics that within different departments or different functional areas, they're accountable to deliver, right? And so it might be, for example, the marketing organization, hey, how are we doing on, click-through rates on our campaigns, or how are we doing on response rates, or how are we doing on, maybe impressions or engagement. So there's like these secondary metrics, but I think what often is missed is that you have some departments, it's much easier to show causation on those primary metrics, right? Like we did X and we got Y outcome, like we drove revenue by 20%. And it's, I think you use the word, it's important. Oftentimes there's CX, it's a little bit harder to show causation, but there's definitely a strong correlation. And what I've seen organizations, when they do this well, they have like a measurement framework that they're using that they can show across these different capability areas. These are the different like secondary metrics that all ladder up to these primary metrics. And you start to see more dots get connected because you're like, okay, like if I'm marketing and marketing's trying to drive conversion and click-through rates here, and then you have, product is accountable for daily active, monthly active users, for example. There's a lot of other metrics, but just as given a specific example, maybe engineering is responsible for, velocity or how many commits they're making or something to that effect, and on. And maybe like, operations is around supply chain efficiency or things like that. If you can like connect all of these things up to your primary metrics and see all of them together, you can start to identify where some of the pain points are just looking at the way that you're measuring, in addition to what you said, which is looking at that journey. So you have this kind of like combination of your measurement framework and your journey, or like the kind of blueprint of here's all the touch points with the customer. Here's the things that are happening, people, process, tech, and data behind the scenes that are enabling that. And then here's how we're measuring all of this. And like, do those things connect or not? And oftentimes they don't. Like there's usually like a disconnect between, like you said, voice of customer, voice of client. You've got customer success or customer services over here. They're tracking and measuring like how quickly are we responding to customer requests? How quickly are we closing tickets, et cetera, et cetera. And like, they're just kind of doing their thing. And then you've got people over here that are focusing on conversion. And you have people over here that are tracking, like efficiency or whatever, but they're not looking at it holistically. And it's creating these disconnects in the experience. So anyway, I think there's like a lot of opportunity for organizations to do what you said, break down those silos, get people together, do the journey mapping so they can have those aha moments where they say, I thought you were doing that. I think that the organizations that are taking stock of the measurement that they have within these different departments and really evaluating how those come together also helps drive a more cohesive and enhanced experience for customers.
A lot of the time too, there's another danger to measurement, and that's an over reliance on measurement. We see this a lot with something like NPS. NPS is kind of, think of it as your first stage of CX. It's a simple measure. You rate your experience 1 to 10. And if you think about that, your average person has something on the B2B side, something like 15,000 yearly interactions with a business. And those 15,000 interactions, you are boiling them down to one number. And so it really takes away a lot of the experience if you over rely on the measurement. And we've also seen, particularly in the contact center space, where there's such an over reliance on metrics and KPIs where people can manipulate those KPIs, and they really need to be manifestations of a customer having a good experience. You can't take the blood out of the experience by just over relying on metrics. But not to say don't use measurement. Measurement is one of the most important things. But at the same time, we don't want to take the person out of it by just focusing on KPIs.
Yeah, man. I could go on a whole diatribe about NPS. I actually wrote a newsletter article about this like a couple months ago. Completely agree. I think many organizations they sort of check the box like, oh yeah, our NPS score is this, our customer satisfaction score is this, our employee, experience or employee satisfaction score is that. And they're like, good, we have a good experience. And meanwhile, actually it's terrible. The customers are not happy. They don't like the product. The employees are pissed and they're leaving. And so, yeah, I agree. You have to find that sweet spot of not being over reliant on the quantitative data. And it's like finding the balance between qualitative and quantitative to create those great experiences. And I think there's also something that's like, it's a tough to quantify thing, but it's important. you can tell when companies have it and you can tell when they don't. And that's brand equity, right? Like there's this idea of like marketing is what you tell people you are, brand is what you really, what customers think you are. And if you're putting money in the brand equity bank, so to speak, by creating this great experience, that will pay dividends in the long term. You look at companies, the big, massive organizations like Apple, right? They've banked up a ton of brand equity, and now they're one of the most valuable companies in the world. And it wasn't just because, it was a super transactional marketing thing. Like they were very much focused on how do we make the experience as great as we possibly can? How do we make it seamless, simple, easy, frictionless? And, here they are, like, worth trillions. And so I think that's another, it's hard. You can't really measure as easily brand equity, but is a really important way to think about, like a mental model around the improvements that you're investing into your customer experience. So we've had a really good conversation around, the intersection of marketing and customer experience. We've been talking a lot about measurement. We've talked about some of the things companies need to keep in mind. What are some examples of companies that are doing this well, where they are able to provide a great experience for their customer? They're able to deliver on the promises they're making in their marketing, and they're able to pull all the way that all the way through to lifelong loyal customers.
Companies that do this really well are those that have marketing programs that borrow very heavily from CX. And there are a couple CX principles that are really important, one of which is outside in versus inside out. The inside out perspective is your internal company projecting your internal perceptions on the market, whereas the outside in perspective is looking at your company, your offering from the perspective of your customers. And that centers really heavily on value. And so for the companies whose marketing programs invest heavily in value, those are the ones that have very, very good, not only marketing programs, but experience programs in general, and just feared. And one of the ones that comes to mind is HubSpot. HubSpot is a very large organization. They're moving away from just being a CRM and to being a MarTech ecosystem that any organization of any size could use. And one of the reasons that they are so good is because they don't just try and sell you HubSpot. If you Google any marketing metric, chances are there's going to be a HubSpot article that comes up. If you Google something along the lines of what is customer experience, there's going to be a HubSpot article that comes up. And this shows how brilliant a content marketing program can be. So when you Google something like a marketing metric or KPI, or even something along the lines of customer experience, chances are HubSpot is going to come up in one of those search results. And the reason for that is that HubSpot is very concerned with the needs of their customers, not just in terms of how they build their product, but in terms of the actual everyday lives of the customer. Chances are that the person responsible for purchasing and incorporating HubSpot is a marketer. And so HubSpot has done extensive research on the needs of marketers, what they're interested in, what they need, what they want to know. And they base their entire content marketing program around. And so when you're factoring in something like the customer journey, it is very rare that an organization is actually in need of a CRM. CRMs are extremely expensive. Usually you don't switch CRMs very often, especially larger organizations. And so that in that customer journey, it is very rare that someone in your target market will need CRM. But someone in your target market, a marketer, probably will need some type of information about something related to marketing always. And so HubSpot has established that relationship just through content with customers that aren't even in the market for CRM. But when that rare circumstance arises where a marketer needs a CRM, they've already established a relationship with HubSpot. And so there's continuity in that relationship that when they think, I need a CRM, HubSpot is probably one of the first things that comes to mind. And that's all based on the fact that HubSpot took these CX principles and they put them into practice in their marketing. So because HubSpot incorporated the CX principle of value and outside-in perspective into their marketing program, now when the circumstance arises, that rare instance where someone does need a CRM, HubSpot has a relationship established with that person in the market. So HubSpot is the first thing that comes to mind when they're actually in the.
So good, man. I can't agree more with the value comment. I think the pieces that stand out to me in what you said is organizations that are just focusing on squeezing as much out of the customer as possible is not the approach. It's not the right strategy. The ones that are saying we're going to give as much value as we possibly can give, like, and still be a viable business. And that will pay dividends for us as a brand and as a business. One that comes to mind for me is Notion. I don't know if you're familiar, if you use Notion. I love Notion. I've been lifelong, as long as they've been around, I've been using them, customer. And what I love about Notion is that they've created so much value, right? They have this free version that is like out the gate, super valuable. They've created this whole series of resources, kind of like you mentioned about HubSpot, where you can go online, you can learn how to use their platform to solve different types of problems. The other thing that's really cool about it is they have this great community. So there's a creator community around Notion, which I think is another thing that brands who are doing this well, they're not just thinking about how do we drive sales from our customers and the value they can create for customers. They're thinking about how do we become the nexus of a community? How do we create this space where customers can come together and learn from each other and start to build relationships with each other? I think a lot of the brands that are doubling down on community based marketing and customer experience they're doing really well right now, right? You think about during COVID, there was a lot of people were separated physically, and there was a lot of, there's kind of this loneliness epidemic, if you will. And I think people want to be around other people. And so businesses that are creating those spaces where people can, learn from one another, create connections with one another, say, hey, wow, there's other people like me here that care about these particular things, right? If you're a business that like Notion, where it's a lot of product people, design people, it's a lot of startups use their product and platform. They're creating these places where you can connect with other designers, you can connect with other product people, you can connect with other startup founders, and it's just a really great opportunity. Figma is another one. Figma is a really great tool that has done this. They've now moved into, they're creating these really large conferences and events for people in the design community. And, I think they've done a great job of cracking the code on, hey, let's not just create a great product and create a great experience, but let's also create environments where people can come together and connect.
Yeah. And that's, it's somewhat ironic that you prioritize the customers so much that you've essentially stepped away from your business relationship with them. And these communities now act as your salespeople because they're true promoters. They're evangelists for products. And I think it really demonstrates how important it is to value your customers. So you value them to the point that you no longer need to tell them about Notion. The people that use Notion are going to tell you for them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I wanted to kind of shift gears into what are some of the things that you think about, especially mid-sized companies and maybe later stage startups. What are some of the things, the tips and tricks, the strategies that people have, that you've seen used and applied with success in this kind of sweet spot marketing customer experience world that are working well, right? We talked about a lot of things today. We talked about measurement. We talked about focusing on value. We talked about journeys. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the industry that are working really well, especially in this world right now, 2024, the world has changed a lot, right? Post-COVID world, AI is gobbling up everything. What are some of the things that you're seeing working well?
So I think the easiest and honestly the lowest hanging fruit for improving your marketing function in general is talking to customers. And it sounds so simple, but I can't tell you how many marketing retreats that I've been to where there's a conversation, something along the lines of, all budgets aside, no restraints. What marketing ideas can we come up with to really move the needle for marketing in 2026? 100% of the time, the customer is never factored into that. It's all inside out thinking. Whereas if someone were to just say, why don't we have 5-10 minute conversations with a few of our customers, the amount of data that you will gather from that it's just indescribable. Because it's just a simple 10-minute conversation with someone who's either a customer or just in the target market. It is so illuminating, and it will shape your entire marketing strategy, because you know your customer, you know their needs, their feelings. You might have rolled out a new product feature that your marketing is getting a lot of pressure to increase uptake or signups for that particular service tier or product feature. And people just don't like it. But no one at the organization is thinking, we put it in front of people, we had them use it, they said they liked it, but really they didn't talk to anyone that's in the market that is really going to tell them, listen, this isn't that useful, or what I would really like this. And so that simple act of talking to your customers, of having conversations, and not just conversations about your business, but conversations to truly understand them and their needs, is one of the biggest game changers for every organization.
Can't agree more. Yeah, I think that I had a recent episode where we talked about this topic exactly, and it was, how do you start to bring customers into the decision-making process, right? Like actually involve them in the co-creation of your marketing strategies. How do you start to test and learn early and often versus, to your point, like going on this, leadership retreat or going off into this offsite and trying to create or craft this perfect approach. And, it's based on your own assumptions and your own thoughts and ideas. And you bring it back and it just falls flat, right? Customer doesn't care. Customer actually doesn't want that. The messaging doesn't resonate because you haven't talked to them. So I completely agree. I think that's a huge opportunity. I think kind of related or tangential to that is this idea of like customer obsession, customer centricity. Obsession is kind of a strong word, but like, I think this idea of you really have to put yourself in the customer's shoes and really think hard about like, what pain are we putting them through that we don't have to put them through, right? Because I think there's sometimes like customers will tell you things that they need and want, but there's also the things that it's almost like they don't know what they want or they don't know what they need. And so you have to really take time to obsess over or like really deeply reflect on, if I go and I try to buy a product, online, how hard is it? Is it needlessly painful? Like, is there friction in ways that you don't expect? I think I encourage executives all the time, like go basically be a secret shopper, right? Like go be your own secret shopper. And for like a week or two, do a little sprint and just, operate in the business as though you're a customer and just see how it feels, see where things fall short. And what you'll probably find is, you're going to have these aha moments where you say, oh, I didn't realize that this is how it was. Like, I mean, this sucks. I hate this. I don't want that. Right. And so I think in addition to bringing your, getting with your customers and talking to them and understanding what they need and want, also taking the time to just put yourself in their shoes and really experience it for yourself. Because countless times I've talked with leaders, they may have done this exercise, but it was like several years ago, right? And they've not even like, frankly, like a lot of times, business leaders haven't even looked at their website in the last like year, right? And so they just sort of like, oh yeah, like I looked at it a year, it's probably the same, but lots of change in a year, right? Lots of change in 6 months. And so take the time on like kind of a regular cadence to really put yourself in their shoes, click around, use your app, use your website, go to if you're, physical retail space, go actually walk the floors and see what it looks like. Buy something, like use your personal credit card and go and purchase something from your business as though you were a customer. And what you'll probably find is like, there's some weird thing that you didn't expect. Right. So anyways, I think that's a big opportunity for business leaders. Anything else, any other strategies or tactics you think that, especially mid-sized companies and late-stage startups would be interested in or would find value in applying?
Absolutely. This is a wish because I don't know how realistic it is. but I think that every business should have CX as a function or a department within it. Larger businesses tend to, they'll hire CX director and they'll say, okay, we have a CX director, maybe we have a VOC program director and an analyst, and then they wipe their hands of CX. But to have a CX department, that really the CX department is the customer. They are functionally, they are the voice of the customer. They are the one that is customer obsessed. And to be able to not only have that department, but allow that department to empower that department to have an impact across other areas of the business. This is, again, someone that's worked in CX. I'm a strong believer in CX. I've seen what CX can do. And so I don't need to be convinced about the importance of it and allocating resources to it. But, in a perfect world, every, medium-sized business and above would have a CX department.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of times organizations, they try to do it and they lack the capability internally to kind of get it done. One thing I will say, customer experience is a relatively new discipline, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, right? Architects and doctors have existed for a long time, but CX practitioners have not. And so sometimes I think organizations can struggle with like, okay, well, where do I find these people, right? And I think a lot of times when looking for the right types of people who think this way, you have to look at almost like unexpected places. Previously in my last role, I hired several individuals that I hired them as service designers and researchers, and they were from completely different backgrounds. One of them was an academic. She was a professor at a university, and another one she worked with the county, and she was providing like trauma assistance for children who, their parents had kind of gone through some sort of challenging situation and they needed to have some support. And they were fantastic at looking for where the pain was, identifying needs and opportunities, unspoken or unmet or unseen, and having that deep level of kind of empathy and curiosity that's required. And so you can, I think organizations, if you're looking for people to really dig into this, obviously you can find people that are trained and experts. I think starting with a solid leader who's done this before is a great place to begin. And then from there, you can start to look in like social sciences, to like psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists who really love the science of human behavior, right? Like why people do what they do. A lot of the great products and experiences that exist today, a lot of those things were concocted or designed or developed by people who came from those worlds, right? They were the ones they deeply understand psychology and like how people think. And that's about a big part of customer experience. One other thing that comes to mind in terms of like a strategy or an approach, I've shared this on the podcast before, but this idea of jobs to be done, sometimes I think a lot of, especially marketers, they think in the world of segments and audiences, right? They're like, who's our segment or our audience? And usually often those segments or audiences are based on demographic data or maybe like based on channel data or transaction data. And what I often will point to and recommend is think about what is the customer ultimately trying to accomplish? Like what is the job to be done, so to speak? And how do you start to use that to drive your decision-making? So like an example that I use is hospitality industry. I'll use that often. And typically when you talk to somebody about hospitality, like a hotel or an Airbnb or something to that effect, the assumption is, oh, well, yeah, what they're trying to do is they're trying to find some place to sleep overnight. And you're like, yes. And they're on a trip. There's some other purpose or some other reason that they're traveling. They're not usually going just because they want to like sleep in your hotel, right? Like there's some other purpose that they're there for. And so how do you start to uncover those things and then start to create an experience around that, right? So rather than like prioritizing and only focusing on making the room as comfortable as possible, making the bed as like, the best fabric and the best pillows and having a thermostat ready, like all those things are important, but also thinking about like, okay, people who are going to hotels, typically I'm going to like keep it high level. They're going to do something for work, right? It's like a business related travel thing. So okay, how do you make it easier for them to get to and from their business meetings wherever they are, right? Maybe you're improving the shuttle experience, and maybe you don't even have a shuttle. Maybe there's no way for people to get from your hotel to some other location. So maybe that's an opportunity. Another one might be, hey, there's people who are they're vacationing, right? That's another typical or common reason why people stay in hotels. How do you make that experience, their vacation experience, that much better, right? And typically hotels do this by just being like, oh, we have a concierge and a front desk. You just go talk to them, and they'll give you some recommendations. But really taking that a step further and saying, how do we build strategic partnerships with other organizations? Maybe it's, we're going to partner with an organization that does excursions, and people can like book him right here at the hotel. And then we're going to coordinate with this other vendor, and they're going to come and pick them up. And there's going to be this super seamless transition process. They can pay the hotel directly. They don't have to pay a separate vendor. They don't have to bring cash or card with them when they go on this excursion. Perhaps there's like some sort of like tasty beverage when they're getting into the car. Like those kinds of touches like make that experience so much better. That's going to really separate you from just any other hotel. I think I use that practical example. You can take it and kind of use it as a metaphor or an analog for other contexts. But the idea is, don't just think about what you think they're trying to do, which in this case is, oh, they're just trying to like spend the night someplace while they're here. It's like, no, what are the other, what are they ultimately trying to accomplish here? And how do we make that so much better? And that drives a lot of, drives a lot of innovation, creativity, new ideas of how you can improve the experience. And then, again, it's going to differentiate you from other businesses.
Yeah, and those simple little tweaks that you can change to make someone's hotel experience that much better. They're not resource intensive. A lot of them are just extremely simple, but the impact that they have is immeasurable.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Joe, this was a fantastic conversation. I genuinely appreciate you coming on the show. But I wanted to give people an opportunity to look you up online. Where can folks find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Joe Bell, or our company, the Go-to-Market Agency, is also on LinkedIn. So I'm always open to having conversations. I love talking about topics like this. So even if it's not business, I'd love to just chat with anyone that has an interest.
Awesome. Appreciate you all tuning in. Joe, thanks so much for being on the show.
My pleasure, Drew. Thank you so much.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you could take a second, hit the subscribe button below. It would really mean the world. I'm trying to make some great content for you every week by interviewing folks and hearing what they have to say about building great experiences. I try to share tips and tricks and things like that. Anyways, take a second, hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.